At first, it's easy to assume that a vision is closer to a tool like a moonwheel or a stellar linchpin than it is to a delusion. Out of all of these tools, delusions seem to be the only one that takes from the user's life force. But if someone were to ask me about the difference between a delusion and these other tools, I would say it comes down to permission. Those delusions that the Fatui manufactured from crystal marrow were stealing Orobashi's power, so the users had to pay the cost through their own life force. Whereas something like a moonwheel is a fragment of power shared with consent. But visions are sus here, because Celestia does work entirely on power stolen from the dragons, especially after the Heavenly Principles lost their functions. Which makes me think that visions are a lot closer to a delusion than they are to a stellar linchpin or a moonwheel. I feel like this was hinted at in the Sudden Snow trailer, when the Tsaritsa insists that the true enemy to love is the blessings given out by deluded gods. So allow me to explain my grounds for this. One of the primary traits of a Descender is supposed to be a will that is capable of rivaling an entire world, which gives one the ability to protect the world, sustain the world, destroy the world, and create the world. But what happens when the current will that is meant to sustain the world loses these abilities? We've been told that, during the Funerary War, the Heavenly Principles was gravely wounded and lost some of their functions. Or in other words, they likely lost their status as a Descender. The Dragon King who fell into darkness had been defeated, but at a heavy cost. Phanes no longer possessed a will capable of shaping the world, and without a proper will occupying that coveted throne, this broken world would crumble into nothingness. This is why the Gnosis and Visions were created, a system made for the purpose of maintaining order while also suppressing the loathing of the world. As for how exactly this system fulfills that purpose, my theory is that Gnosis and Visions have imprisoned the will of the fallen Dragon King while simultaneously siphoning from his primordial authority. The 7 divine thrones operate on power that was stolen from the elemental sovereigns, but I tend to view these sovereigns as emanations that come from Nibelung's light, with him being the ultimate sovereign from which all of that authority originates. Nibelung is the white light, while the sovereigns represent the 7 hues contained in that light. By this logic, if you can siphon from Nibelung's authority, you can theoretically siphon all of the world's authorities. We know that gods and powerful dragons can't really be killed in a traditional sense. Their bodies can die, but their will and consciousness is sort of immortal. Take the Tatarigami found throughout Inazuma as an example, an energy that erupted from the will of the Electro-Sovereign after being executed by A. If one elemental sovereign can leave behind such a pervasive phenomena, then imagine what the Dragon King himself would leave behind. He is the original will of this world after all. This should be what Nouvelette's story about Visions is alluding to when it says, "To continue to subdue and control the resentments and loathing of the world, the usurper and the one who came after created the Gnosis together." I think that siphoning from this authority has placed a curse on the world, and this would make the whole system a lot closer to a delusion than we have been led to believe. Delusions are made from god remains, and I kind of see this theoretical Nibelung prison as a giant delusion that all visions derive their power from. I also think that the souls of vision users are fed to these remains as a sort of offering that's meant to mitigate the curse. For the rest of this video, I will of course go into more detail on why I believe these things and how I think it all works. Spoiler warnings will go in the description, while any needed corrections will be in a pinned comment. So without further ado, let's unpack the secrets behind Gnosis and Visions. When it comes to my delusion idea, the scenario that I am presenting is a type of unsustainable energy exchange. Celestia is exchanging souls for the power of a divine corpus, and ultimately dooming the world by doing so. Which kind of reminds me of a novel I researched while writing this script, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. I looked into this novel because it's referenced in Volume 8 of Vera's Melancholy, which is titled The Girls Themselves. This particular volume is the one in which Ike elaborates on the purpose of those eye-eating organs that the dominant race of the Andromeda Empire possess, which is obviously meant to be a vision thing. Just a quick disclaimer that Asimov wrote this story around an entirely theoretical isotope, and any of the physics I am describing here are a part of the novel and not actual science. The Gods themselves is split into 3 parts, with Part 1 taking place on Earth, Part 2 taking place in a parallel universe, and Part 3 taking place in a colony on Earth's moon. The Earth setting takes place about a century after a major crisis that reduced Earth's population from 6 billion down to 2 billion. Narratively, the story is largely driven by a device called the Pump, which exchanges matter between Earth and the parallel universe, which has completely different physical laws than our own. Because of these reversed physics, exchanging matter between these 2 universes yields a nuclear reaction. The Pump is presented as this clean source of unlimited energy, which is, of course, too good to be true. A physicist named Peter Lamont discovers that continued use of the Pump threatens to destroy both worlds because the use of this device has been increasing the strong nuclear force inside of the sun. This threatens to explode Earth's sun while simultaneously cooling the sun in the parallel universe. The reference to this novel makes a lot of sense to me, because Teyvat is a dying world that is running out of time, much like the parallel world with the dying sun. In Teyvat's case, Nibelung should be that sun, since he is the light that everything on this world originally comes from. Besides Vera's Melancholy, there are a couple other stories within the game that I've used to piece together this picture. And the story that really got me started on this theory is a book from Inazuma called Princess Mina of the Fallen Nation. This book has no listed author, but it reads a lot like a Mr. Nine title. It's presented as a fictional work, but is full of allegories that are meant to disguise the truths of the world as fiction. I had a hard time understanding the allegories at first, but eventually I realized this book is trying to tell us something about visions and delusions. It makes plenty of sense for a book from Inazuma to touch on visions and delusions, since Inazuma's storyline was largely driven by Fatui interference that led to both the Vision Hunt Decree and the mass distribution of delusions. With that being said, let's go ahead and deconstruct this book, as well as my current interpretation of it. This story introduces you to a world plagued by a century-long war led by evil overlords known as the Nakara Daimyo, who have been competing with each other for dominance over the lands. The Nakara Daimyo use a form of terrifying sorcery known as Nakara's Hex, which sucks the life out of the land, converting it into a power that's bestowed upon formidable samurai, who are capable of wielding such power. We are told that Nakara's Hex is something that was created by Onmyoji who dwell in the Sky Tower at the center of the world. The protagonists of this story are a samurai described as a warrior who fell from the skies, and a self-proclaimed Princess of Destruction. The narrative follows their travels as they head to the Sky Tower to confront the Onmyoji about the source of Nakara's Hex. Upon arriving at the Sky Tower, they are told that Nakara's Hex was created to restore vitality to a world that was slowly declining. The purpose of this stored vitality is to recreate the world after this one has been destroyed. The story ends with the samurai traversing an endless desert of a world, wondering to himself if the Sky Tower's plans to create a new world have been realized. This book is obviously about the cycles of the world and creating a new one from the ashes of the last, but the whole system portrayed in this book bothered me so much because it sounds rather unsustainable. And the multiple worlds thing makes it very reminiscent of the problems with the electron pump from the gods themselves. So to make sense of the implications in this book, I just had to try and tear this apart piece by piece. The Chinese, Japanese, and Korean titles for this story are a reference to Code Geass Akito the Exiled, which are a series of OVAs set in the Code Geass universe. If you know anything about Code Geass, it actually makes a lot of sense for Vision lore to be inspired by this series. Chess is something that is consistently used as symbolism throughout the entire series, so it fits in rather well with the Gnosis. Plus, we all know how much Hoyoverse loves the idea of a collective consciousness, and the lore for this series pretty much treats the concept of gods as synonymous with the collective unconscious of humanity. Geass is a power that is able to access or alter people's minds because it acts as a link to this collective unconscious. The power of Geass is acquired through a contract with a person known as a code bearer, and when someone's Geass reaches its pinnacle, they are qualified to replace that code bearer by taking the code for themselves. Geass even manifests through people's eyes, and the protagonist's Geass relies on direct eye contact to work. As for why the title references Akito the Exiled specifically, I think it comes down to this tangent from researcher Sophie Randall, where she touches on the topic of consciousness affecting reality because things in this world only become fixed through observation by intelligent beings. This effectively describes how fate works in Teyvat. Fate is anchored by using the world formula to calculate and observe future possibilities. As for how this is relevant to visions, it has to do with visions being a part of this world's rules. We also know that the world formula and elemental energy are a linked concept because of this 7-colored statue at Easy Breeze Resort. I could honestly write a whole separate theory just on the Code Geass references and the world formula, and I actually tried to include all of that in this video at one point, only I had to acknowledge that I was trying to fit 2 theories into one and it was not meshing. I'd also like to wait until we get more of the Snezhnaya lore, because I can tell just by looking at Mitya that we are going to get lore about visions and the world formula through his story. To begin tackling the allegories from the actual narrative of Princess Mina of the Fallen Nation, by far the easiest allegory to pick out is the Sky Tower at the center of the world, which is obviously meant to be Celestia. Since the conflict is most likely referencing the Archon War, the Nakara Daimyo should be the gods. Meanwhile, Nakara's hex represents the blessings of the gods. Since Nakara's hex is explicitly stated to have been created by those who dwell in the Sky Tower, that means it is referring to blessings that come from Celestia. Therefore, by my current interpretations, this does not include moonwheels or stellar linchpins. It is specifically referring to gnosis and visions. Which brings me to this life-draining trait that Nakara's hex is described as having. This implies that visions have the same life force draining effects as a delusion, but instead of the user's own life force being drained, the planet's life force is. This is because visions are a system, not an individual person, so the draining of life force is being spread out amongst all of the users and the planet itself. Vision users are essentially a superorganism that have been fused with the planet. To channel the elemental forces, this superorganism draws upon power from the imprisoned dragon remains, which inflicts the Dragon King's curse upon all of the users and the world. Which makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. It would explain René de Petricor's belief that receiving a vision is the same as selling one's fate to the fate of the world. So in reality, this system isn't suppressing the loathing of the world, it's exacerbating it while trying to contain all of that rage in a box. Then it feeds the souls of vision users to the remains as a way of mitigating the curse. Everyone with a vision is supposedly a candidate to ascend to Celestia, but the Temple of Space quest implies that you have to give up your memories as a cost for this kind of ascension. I view these forsaken memories as the part of your soul that is taken for this purpose. At a certain point in Princess Mina of the Fallen Nation, we get a flashback into the samurai's past, where it's mentioned that he once fought for the sake of freeing his own nation from the control of the Nakara Daimyo. His nation was apparently called Kogami, which means little god in Japanese, so I always figured that Kogami is meant to refer to vision users, since they are all candidates to ascend to godhood. But this new revelation that all Konrians are descendants of the Tsuritsa adds even more to this. I think that Kogami refers not only to Konria, but to all of the Tsuritsa's descendants. They are little gods because they are carriers of a bloodline that is mixed with gods. Barbeloth's chapter of The Little Witch and the Undying Fire hinted at the existence of this mixed bloodline, referring to them as Nephilim. With that in mind, I'd like to bring up Raiden Shogun's voice line about visions, where she states that the key is people's desire, and, well, there is another side to it too. This is something that has always driven me mad, trying to think of what the other side to it is. What is the other requirement to receive a vision, besides a wish that has reached the heavens? But I think it makes sense now. The secret requirement for receiving a vision is that you have to have some sort of divine lineage. This term for vision users, allogenies, might simply be another term for Nephilim. There is a possibility that not all of the Tsaritsa's descendants became Conrians, and that threads of her bloodline are still present on the surface, meaning that a large number of Vision users could also be her descendants. This divine lineage may not always be tied to the Tsaritsa. For example, Nicole's would instead come from being a fallen angel, but still, I think it's possible that many Vision users are indeed descended from the Tsaritsa. This could be at least partially why the Tsaritsa hates Visions so much and wants to gain control over this system. It's offering up the last of her children as sacrifices. On top of that, the draining of life from the land could have something to do with Snezhnaya's ecosystem undergoing this transition from a warm, green land into a frozen wasteland. While on the subject, I find it very interesting how closely Snezhnaya's environmental shift matches up with Dragonspine. We know that Dragonspine also used to be home to a lush and green environment. It only became a frozen wasteland after the celestial nail fell, and I'd definitely view the nails as a part of this whole system as well. They are basically there to pin down the dragon's shadow, while also siphoning its power. They're a suppression mechanism, while also acting as a siphoning and storing device. Celestia seems to be holding on to one final nail, and I think the Heavenly Principles are saving this one in case the system ever fails, and they need something to drop on the big, shadowy dragon. As for a location for this theoretical prison, I think there are two different factors to this. I believe each individual vision contains a fragment of Nibelung that's become mixed with the soul of the vision's owner, but I also think there's a larger, central body that is sealed away underground, and that it's the source of the abyss trying to invade Teyvat from within the planet. I see this main body as a singularity that exists at the heart of the world. This idea that each vision contains a fragment of Nibelung is something that I'm getting from stellar linchpin lore. The Fatui believe that whenever a stellar linchpin appears, impurities of the third descender are fixed into place. Impurities is most likely referring to earthly attachments and desires, while fixed in place means frozen in time for the sake of containment. If the impurities of a stray, fragmented soul are left to fester, they can turn into something like this amalgamation of resentment that we faced during Sandrone's quest. If we apply this to visions, they could be related to draconic impurities that have been fixed in place. They are meant to prevent stray fragments of Nibelung's soul from festering. God remains work in an interesting way, where as long as the main body still exists, all of these separate fragments still maintain their power and their connection to the main body. If visions come from Nibelung's impurities being fixed in place, then perhaps the vision user's own soul becomes intertwined with Nibelung's soul, and eventually must return to that origin. Or in other words, return to the mother body that all of the fragments strive to return to, with an extra soul tossed in as an offering. The Gnosi's backstory given through Nouvelette's profile even states that all fragments of the Primordial were driven to devour each other, implying these fragments are cannibalizing each other until they become whole again. This could be what Nicole's story about her vision is referring to when it says, "As for that final outcome, it was of little import, for consciousness born of light, even when fallen to the mortal realm, invariably strives to return to its origin." Like I said, I kind of view Nibelung as a singularity or point of origin when it comes to the world of Teyvat. Everything strives to return to the singularity at the heart of the world. Which brings me to the topic of this main body that I believe might be sealed underground. Remember the space-time anomaly that we encountered below the Celestial Nail in the chasm? What if that was Nibelung's cage, and this giant shadow is what's left of him? A cage designed to weaken abyssal forces, inhabited by a shadow that devours and assimilates any life form unfortunate enough to fall into its maw. It would explain why this space felt so alive. I know if you go deep enough into the world, you start to encounter the Abyss, but there's no way this space is just the Abyss. We've been to the Abyss before in Skirk's quest, and it's totally different from this place. The flow of time in the Abyss is slowed down, whereas in this space it was more like the time on everyone's body had been paused. The passage of time also became something purely based on individual perception. During the Snezhnaya introduction video, the devs mentioned something about using the power of cryo to freeze time on some ancient power contained in the world, which is exactly what this place felt like, a space where the flow of time has been paused. Plus, the trailers have shown us that Paimon is going to fall ill upon our arrival in Snezhnaya, and one of the only other times Paimon seemed to feel ill was when we were stuck in this place. Volume 11 of Vera's Melancholy really reinforced this idea for me, since it is titled The Beast Calling Out for Love at the Heart of the World, which is a reference to episode 26 of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a reference to a short story by Harlan Ellison. What if Nibelung is the beast at the heart of the world? If you take the time to read the short story this title originally comes from, it has literally everything to do with this whole concept of draining and trapping impurities. At the center of this story lies a civilization called the Concord, which has technology that is able to drain madness and convert it into a vapor. At one point in the story, an evil dragon is trapped and drained of its madness, which causes the dragon to transform into a man. This works so well with my theory that we are going to do the same thing for Nibelung that we did for Durin. You can watch my video about Ermin being a reincarnation of Nibelung for more on that whole idea. My theory about the space below the chasm being a prison for Nibelung is one that I've had for a long time now. It all started when I was speculating about where Rayrir had been for 500 years. Since this chasm space has the ability to suppress abyssal powers, I thought that maybe it was a special prison created for Nibelung's abyss-tainted remains, and that maybe Rayrir somehow ended up tossed into that space as well. As it happens, Rayrir did get trapped in a prison, but instead it was the one Nibelung created for the moons. So I was kind of onto something, even if not entirely correct. But I think the Nibelung aspect to the idea still works, and you know what really adds on to that feeling? Honkai Star Rail and everything going on with the imprisoned husks of the cosmic serpent, Ouroboros. The 4.0 destination for the Astral Express was a world known as Planarcadia, which is a planet hiding a major secret. You see, this world was built on a foundation of laughs, entertainment, and the shed husk of a dead cosmic dragon. In Star Rail, the universe is currently overseen by gods known as Eons, which rule over concepts known as paths, but before Eons, there were star-devouring dragons known as Leviathan. In fact, the all-devouring narwhal is probably a subspecies of Leviathan. The only known Leviathan existing in Star Rail's universe at this point is Ouroboros the Voracity, a creature who is both Eon and Leviathan. Ouroboros apparently died at some point, but they were a shedding creature, and therefore they left behind a bunch of shed husks that are spread out across the universe. Just like the way God remains work on Teyvat, these husks are still very much alive with the Leviathan's power, so they had to be sealed away. Planarcadia is one of the worlds on which a husk has been sealed, and this particular husk has been imprisoned within a ritual known as the Phantasmoon Games, with an ancient tree known as the Panarch Elwood acting as the prison's seal. The purpose of the games is to generate a form of energy known as Wishpower, which is fed to the husk to keep it satiated and slumbering. Wishpower is basically the type of energy that drives beings towards certain paths, and is therefore related to the imaginary energy from which Eons get their power. It's a type of energy that responds to human obsessions and desires. As a concept, Wishpower has so much overlap with the human desire aspect to gaining a vision. So I started to see Planarcadia as this world that is operating on Star Rail's repackaged version of Vision lore. I mean, the last planet that we were on, Amphorius, was basically Genshin's entire Teyvat storyline condensed into a year, so why would they stop there? There's even an element to the Ouroboros situation that relates to my theory about siphoning another god's authority, because Ouroboros had something rather important stolen from them by another Eon. The Eons of Star Rail have something called a primum mobile, which essentially embodies the concept that they rule over. Ouroboros and another Eon, known as Aha the Elation, have an overlapping primum mobile relating to human desires. And Aha apparently stole this primum mobile from Ouroboros. Meaning Aha is using these prisons to siphon from the Voracity's path energy. This all had me wondering, What if Gnosis and Visions are a prison to Nibelung in the same way that the Phantasmoon games are to Ouroboros? The World Tree that was modified into Irminsul might have also been converted into a seal for Nibelung's remains, just like the Panarch Elwood seals Ouroboros. Phanes could be stealing from Nibelung's authority just like Aha has stolen the Voracity's Prima Mobile. Maybe Celestia is feeding Vision users to the beast, just like the Phantasmoon games are feeding Wishpower to Ouroboros. Nibelung in his current state could even count as a type of Leviathan. Leviathans are pretty much a type of biological black hole, and the way I've been putting it is that Nibelung is like a sun that collapsed into a black hole. This all aligns pretty well with my idea of Nibelung being a singularity situated in the space below the chasm, since the note left behind by Yelan's ancestor Boyong questioned, "Have we accidentally entered the belly of some mighty Leviathan, only to be slowly devoured by it?" It all just makes a lot of sense to me. The husk sealed by the Phantasmoon games isn't even the only piece of Ouroboros on Planarcadia. My favorite lore sponge as of late, Ashvale, happens to have his own husk of Ouroboros sealed within his prosthetic arm. It manifests as this devouring shadow, and he suppresses it with these nails in his wrist. Which does kind of remind me of the celestial nails being used to pin down the shadow. Because of Ashvale, we also know that the Ouroboros husks have the God Remains trait I covered earlier, where separate fragments will seek each other out and resonate with each other. When he removes the pins and releases the shadow, it causes a reaction with the fragment sealed within Planarcadia. To top all of that off, one of the sources of lore for Planarcadia are these stories called Moonlit Tales, and the first Moonlit Tale contains a reference to the gods themselves by Isaac Asimov. I swear, the lore recycling all comes full circle. There's also an excerpt from one of the Moonlit Tales that stands out to me and somewhat influenced this theory. In that moment, I saw the truth. The giant wolf had fallen hundreds of years ago, its flesh cast into the forest, its bones buried in the earth. Yet its soul remained, its instinct still driven to slaughter. And so we donned the guise of the giant wolf, deceiving its soul with our own deaths, dissolving its desires, life after life, generation after generation. This is kind of how I view the process of using visions to trap impurities and then using the owners of the visions as sacrifices. Like we are dissolving Nibelung's desires through their deaths. It's like a ritualistic purification process. I'd also like to relate this concept of donning the guise of the wolf to the likelihood that visions are based off of dragon pearls from Chinese mythology, which are essentially a core representing a dragon's power. Maybe one of the purposes of a vision is to don the guise of the dragon, deceiving the dragon's soul into believing these humans are its own children. But who's to say that this will work forever? Who's to say that the beast crying out for both love and vengeance won't one day rise again? I really had to stretch my brain in order to refine this theory into something that felt coherent enough to share. I kept getting lost in topics that are all connected but still somehow better off as their own separate video. I had a lot of frayed edges to cut off that are now sitting in my drafts as a starting place for future scripts. Hopefully those frayed edges can still amount to something with the new lore, and hopefully this theory doesn't freeze over immediately. If you made it all the way here to the end, you are greatly appreciated. Make sure to leave a like and a comment to feed the algorithm, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, maybe even consider giving me $1 a month on Patreon if you are feeling generous. With all of that being said, hopefully I'll see you next time